G'day, I'm Brian. Welcome to my review of the Nikon Z or Z5ii, depending where you come from and how you pronounce those things. Game-changing wildlife photography, or camera for wildlife photography. Or is it? Let's find out. I've been testing this camera. It is my camera for the last week or so locally. All the images are of wild animals, so in parks and recreation areas and reserves around Brisbane and the Gold Coast here in Australia. The lens I've used is my Nikon Z600 f6.3. Yes, this lens definitely helps, but we'll talk about that later as well. Reasons for buying. This is a still photography camera only for me. It is not a hybrid. We shoot videos with a dedicated video camera, so this will be just about still photography. Why did I buy? Because I wanted a second camera body which I could put this lens on. That's my 24-120 f4 S-line ends from Nikon. So when I'm out in the field, I've got two camera bodies, and depending on the situation, I can use either. Both are at hand. Primary lens will always be the 600 6.3. My experience is for wildlife and bird photography, a long lens is probably going to be mounted on your camera most of the time, but there will be times when you will use a shorter lens. Animalscapes, close-ups, when something gets really close, which they do where I travel to for wildlife photography often. But also, can it substitute for my Z8 if something happens to the Z8 in the field? Will I be happy with the results that I get? So a backup as well for the Z8. The price I paid was 2,430 Australian dollars, and that's about 1,600 US dollars equivalent. And in comparison, this is from authorized Nikon dealers, and I did get a deal on that. Most authorized dealers here in Australia are not dropping the price of the Z5ii. They don't normally do that on new camera bodies, but I'm pretty sure they're selling a ton of them and they don't need to. But I did get a decent deal. Now, in comparison, because many people are going to look at this camera and go, this or a Z6ii. Now, the cheapest I saw a Z6ii from a Nikon special authorized dealer here in Australia was $1,350 more, which so happens to be about the price of this lens when it's on sale, roughly. Maybe $100, $200 here or there. So I get a Z5ii plus an S-line lens for the price of a Z6ii. Oh, that's what I've got. And when they're not on sale, the price difference, at least here in Australia, between the Z5ii and the Z6ii is even more than that. So more than $1,350 difference. Very important and a key consideration. Camera settings. I normally have it my shutter speed around 1/2000th of a second. Okay, normally. I can go lower, way down, or higher. Birds in flight, if I was just doing dedicated birds in flight, I probably have it about 1/4000th of a second, and if things are really low light, I might have it all the way down to 1/125th. But generally around that 1/2000th of a second, or 2,500th of a second, or 1/1600th, but around that, because it's versatile. It still gives me sharp images, but if a bird flies or whatever, or an animal moves, then it'll freeze the action under most circumstances. F-stop, I don't normally have to change the f-stop from 6.3 with this lens. It is super sharp at that. The only time I would change the f-stop is for I wanted a greater depth of field. If I've got a couple of animals or a few animals and they're staggered and I want to get them all in focus, then I maybe stop it down to f8 or f11, something like that. Exposure compensation will depend on the time of day, but I do adjust the exposure compensation depending whether it's super light, very bright skies, or early in the morning, or overcast. I will change that. Also, depending if it's like a all-white bird, if I remember, I'll change the exposure compensation just to try to bring out more detail in the white feathers and not have it overexposed. Editing, I use Lightroom and Topaz, denoise and sharpening. Didn't need a lot of sharpening at all with these images with the Z5ii. Lightroom is my primary editing suite, so most of the editing is done there, and maybe something quick in denoise or sharpening if required. I'm going to have these listed in chapters. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get some images that I took in the Pantanal, Brazil last year from the D850 as baseline images. You could look at those, look at the quality, and compare them to what I'm going to show you on the Z5ii. Then I'll do the same for Z8. Some images I took in Southern Africa this year. And you can have a look at those and compare them to the images I took with the Z5ii. There's there'll be a couple of mammal images. We really have, where I go, we got kangaroos and wallabies, and for those who don't know what a wallaby is, it's like a small version of a kangaroo, but we don't have tons of different wildlife that I can show you. We're going to do small birds, and this is of interest. Everyone is thinking 46 megapixel camera, 24 megapixel camera. If I've got to crop in a lot for a small bird, because even at 10 meters, the birds I've got are some of the smallest birds, or the images I'm going to show you, the smallest birds in Australia. So what happens when I crop? Am I still going to get some decent detail compared to a high megapixel camera? I got some bird in flight shots. I didn't go out to specifically look at birds in flight, but every now and again I see a bird flying and I'd have a crack at birds in flight just to see how sharp they turned out. Dynamic range, we'll have a look at some birds that are black, some birds that are white, some birds that are pied, and some birds that are in shadows. You know, what happens when we pull up the shadows? Is there still decent colour? Is there decent detail and sharpness? I'll give my conclusions at the end, and then I'll show you some bonus images, and make sure you hang around for those bonus images. They'll give you, they're all edited, but they'll give you a real good idea of what this camera can do. And apart from the baseline images from the D850 and the Z8 and the bonus images, for the other categories or the other chapters, I'm going to do the raw file and then show you what it looks edited. Okay, give you an idea of distances and how big the crop was and that sort of thing, and what sort of detail you can pull out of these files. I found the autofocus to be snappy, the eye tracking to be very good. And for anyone to tell you that they're eye tracking, they use the eye tracking and it gets everything all the time, under very controlled conditions, I'm sure they may well do. But they're not fail-safe, and honest people will tell you that they're not, no matter what system you've got, but I found it very good. It's on the heels of the Z8, maybe not quite as good, but compared to a DSLR, even like a D850, it is miles ahead. The autofocus and the tracking modes. Well, the D850 doesn't even have tracking modes like that, so they got 3D tracking, but doesn't have the eye tracking and stuff like that. So compared to a D850, that is miles ahead. Colour and contrast is super. I am super happy with the colours and contrast I'm getting out of this camera body. Detail, excellent for 24 megapixels. Again, you're going to see photos, make up your own mind. This is what I see, maybe you see something different. And of course, dynamic range I found was very good. It's not a miracle worker. If something's in deep shadows, depending on the angles and the shutter speed and different things you've got, some shots worked out, some didn't, but often I could, even in deep shadows, I could pull something out which you could still post on, say, social media, you know, small format like a Facebook or an Instagram, and you would know what the bird is, and it'd look more than fine. It may not be a poster size thing that you're going to do, but generally I found the dynamic range to be very, very good indeed, and you'll see some of that in the images. Handling, very intuitive. For a small camera body, I guess that's kind of like that. That's a Z9, Z5. Everything kind of falls to hand. There was a couple little buttons, like there's when I'm doing the zoom button to zoom in on photos, sometimes I'd hit this little wheel here. Oh, sorry, you can't see it. I'd hit this button here and hit the little wheel, and it'd change me something else, take me to something else. But generally speaking, yeah, nice deep grip. I use back button focus for straight to the thumb, and I only use the shutter release button purely as a trigger. It doesn't have the screen here like that. where you see all your details, your shutter speed, etc. on there, but I got used to that straight away. You can see all that through the viewfinder, or if you flip the screen open there, it'll also show you your menus and stuff like that. But all your menus and stuff you can see through the viewfinder, so I didn't find that. But I found that handling excellent, especially on this lens, which is super lightweight. It's only 1.4 kilos-ish. On a light body, 700 grams, it was still really well balanced with this particular lens on it. And I'll just do a little comparison to it with a Nikon D750, what I owned for several years. And people are saying that the sensor is inherited from that. Whatever tweaks they've done to the sensor, the files out of this to me are much improved over a D750. Again, I've got to give credit to the lens. There's got to be something there. But you're probably going to use lenses, all the lenses are getting better and better as time goes on. But the files are much better. The autofocus is miles ahead. The colour's better. Contrast is better. Detail, for the most part, is better. So if you're thinking about this compared to a D750, or you're looking at a D750, you don't want to spend $1 million and you want to get in mirrorless, from my perspective, this is way better than a D750, the files that it's turning out for me so far. That's it for now. I'm going to go through all the chapters. You'll just see photos. I won't be doing any rambling on. They'll speak for themselves. And then at the end, I'm going to do the conclusion. And I'm going to show you the bonus images, and just hang around for those. Go and have a look. They will really give you... Then you're not going to get stuff that is better than these. It's not a bragging thing. It's just that the situations were good and the light was good and everything else. So this will give you a real idea of the quality that this can turn out with its 24 megapixels. So let's get into the chapters, and I'll see you at the conclusion. So let's get to my conclusion now. My summary of the Nikon Z5ii. Is it a game-changing camera for wildlife photography? Not in and of itself, because it's not quite where a Z8 is or a Z9, but for the price, absolutely. It is very close to these pro body cameras. And it used to be there was a huge difference. They had, you know, you'd have a D850 and whatever else to, you know, a D600 or a 610, and the gap was massive. I know when I went from a D750 to a D850, the gap was massive. That gap is shortening. The gap is getting smaller. 10 frames a second, some people might think that's not enough. I've found for most of the circumstances I was using it in, it's fine. I actually have my Z8 set at 10 frames a second. I only shoot RAW because I don't want to look at my computer or look at, and I've got 300 images in 20 seconds or whatever the math is. So unless the circumstances like I'm dedicated to birds in flight or that sort of thing, or something moving really fast, then I don't even use the 20 frames a second. So 10 frames a second, you think of that compared to a D850 or a D750, it's well above those. And snapping at the heels of the pro cameras that were there, like a, you know, D5s and D6s from not so long ago, which were the top of the range from Nikon. Super happy with the colour, super happy with the detail. $1,600 US. Get this, chuck on a 180 to 600. I know it's still not small beans for some people, but if you look at a Z8 and even my lens, or you know, even one of the super exotics like a 600 f4, things like that, it's a multiple of 5 or 6 or whatever the price, probably more than that in price. I'm absolutely confident that you will get images out of this that you will be super stoked with. So if I had to change, something happened to my Z8 and I had to use the Z5 with my 600, am I confident that I'm going to get images that I'm super stoked with? And most people, depending on the circumstance, won't really notice the difference with the Z8. Yes, the Z8, if it's a small bird and it's double the distance, you know, like 20 metres or 30 metres, you are definitely going to get a crop and a detail that you're not going to get with this. But under most circumstances, learn to use your legs, move forwards and backwards, get close as you can, use your field craft, get a bit closer when you've got a smaller megapixel camera. Don't just rely on the megapixels. But I'm sure that this camera, with a decent lens, not a super expensive lens, could take images that you could easily enter into competitions. Easily. So absolutely, for the price. What is entry level anymore? This is a feature-packed camera. There'll be firmware updates that'll improve it even more. So I'm really, really happy with my choice of the Z5ii as a still photography camera. It's going to be a great backup when necessarily, and going to work really well as a second camera and lens kit with my primary gear. So thanks for watching, and check out these bonus images. I think you'll be surprised. Bye for now.